Great. Hello, good afternoon, colleagues. My name's Dharmendra Kanani. I'm Director of Strategy at Friends of Europe, and welcome to this event, this discussion hosted by Friends of Europe as part of Green Week on Towards Greener Cities. The debate is Citizens as Drivers for Change. We have a really interesting combination of contributions for you to kickstart the debate, but actually what matters is you in this conversation. These people are going to be able to stimulate some of your thoughts with a bit of provocation, with some thinking, their experiences, and what they've learned to date in terms of engaging citizens. And I hope that we can make the most of this conversation, as I said, because this is about you in the audience being able to think through the how and the what of citizen engagement. The why is pretty obvious, I think. It's centuries old, but actually the what and the how matters increasingly in the environment we live in. But before I say any more, I have some kind of technical stuff to share with you, which I'm not very good at. So hopefully those of you who've been here already will know that you need to download the Connects Me app. Most of you know this? No? So those of you who don't, go onto your phone, which I'm going to ask you to obviously put on silent afterwards, but if you go onto your phone and go and download, go onto the, the internet and download something called Connects Me, so that's C-O-N-N-E-X, capital M-E, it's an app. So if you can download that and you go to event code 2604, so it's the Connects Me app, and it's the event code 2604, because we're going to ask you some questions throughout this discussion. And obviously this event is being live streamed also, so hopefully people out there can download the app too and actually engage, I hope, in the questions we're going to ask you also. So again... All information are... so this young gentleman, great. Do you want to... There we go, don't be shy, look. If you've got one of these, okay, it's all explained on there. Okay, so we have that information for you. So download the app. We're going to ask you some questions and canvas views so that we can make this as interactive and enjoyable as possible also. Feel free to tweet, obviously. You can use the hashtag EU Green Week. And also you can use the hashtag Friends of Europe. So it's hashtag FOE debate. So feel free to engage with the people outside also. So that's on that. Also, because it's being live streamed, you ought to be aware that when I invite you to engage in the questions and answer session, you will be filmed, and by actually participating, you are signing away your right to be publicized and commented on and shared across the world as this is being live streamed. So to be aware of that. I'm sure none of you will have an issue with that, I hope. So just to be aware of that in terms of what we're trying to do in this discussion, this debate. All right. I hope all of that is clear. As I said, we've got an interesting range of speakers for you now. I'll move on to them at the moment. But I suppose I just wanted to say just one word, actually, about the nature of citizenship engagement. And I was just discussing this with the speakers, that increasingly, I find the kind of concept of empowerment a bit dated, patronizing, and almost as if someone holds the power and others don't, and others need to be given that power. And actually, the times that we live in, perhaps we need to rethink what we mean by empowerment and use a different language, and really think seriously about where power sits. And actually, if you were to create, if there were the conditions and the right emotions and the ability and the capacity of people to do the right thing or want to do the right thing, what would that look like? And how do you invert the power discourse to a certain extent and invert the power arrangements around our communities and our countries to a certain extent? Given what we're witnessing at the moment, it feels like those on the right-hand side of the political spectrum seem to have a language that connect with people, seem to have a sense of ability to tap into people's emotions around the lack of trust, the issue of financial corruption and corrupt governance. Let's look at what's happening in Italy most recently and what's happened there and what the implications are for the EU in more long term. Brexit, Trump, etc. All of these point to issues around trust, engagement, and people's sense of hope and aspiration, whether actually they believe in those that govern and lead them. So I think the notion of empowerment perhaps needs to be thought through a bit more differently, but you might have a view on that. I'm going to start with a question. So if you've got your app downloaded, I'd like you to answer this one question. So, as citizens, are you willing to help drive change? So as citizens, are you willing to help drive change? A, no, I don't care. B, no, I wouldn't know how. Yes, but it won't change much. And D, yes, of course. So that's the question. As citizens, are you willing to help drive change? No, I don't care. No, I wouldn't know how. Yes, but it won't change much. Yes, of course. Now, those of you in the audience who might be, involved in policy or community development or, a range of different backgrounds, it's also important for you to answer this question. You are citizens also. So if I can urge you to engage in this conversation as anyone else would in this room and outside. So if I can ask you to answer the question. Yeah?
Just mention to be in the right session, so the 4.3 and not because sometimes they are not in the right session.
Why don't you tell them that? So they need to be in session 4.3?
Yeah.
Okay, I've been told that you need to be in session 4.3. Okay. So you've got either A, B, C, D. Okay. Have you got the answers to that question? Yeah? Is that done? Have we got enough time? Is that people kind of... Okay, right. Hopefully we'll get a response to that. My colleagues, I'm looking at my colleagues at the back. Is it happening?
Yes, of course.
89%. 89% of you. Yes, of course. And 11%, but it won't change much. I wonder how accurate that is over time.
They have to click on a little button in the top right to actually get into session 4.3.
So you have to click on the top right to get into the session 4.3. I'm going to drop this because actually this is like hindering the process. I thought it would be smooth, and it's a shame it's not. It should be. Given the pace of technological change, it should be easy, but it's not. Hey, so I'm gonna turn first to one of our speakers, who is Giulio Guagito, Director of Community Management at Climate Kick. What I'd like to ask you is that, given what you do with this particular model of enterprise that works with citizens, is it changing anything? And is it making an impact? It should be on and working.
Working? Yeah? Okay, thank you. Is it making impact? Is it making a difference? I think yes, but. So I think from our perspective, where we're coming from, we're trying to stimulate innovation on climate solutions. And what we've realized is that for a long time there is an emphasis and a rhetoric around the single point solution. So the magic app that is going to solve all the problems in the world, or the lone startup that is going to fix all the problems of institutions and otherwise. And I think there's lots of merits in these solutions, but what we are increasingly realizing...
Julia, just one second. Yeah. Can I check? Can you all hear him at the back? Is it clear? It's clear. You may want to speak a little bit slower to make sure people are able to.
So thank you.
And also for the interpretation.
Yep.
Okay.
So what we're increasingly realizing that if we really want to change systems and work on complex issues, and anything like air pollution, waste, recycling, etc., having no single magic app or no single individual solution is going to save this. We need to form new type of movements and look at issues on a systemic level. So that's the first thing. So yes, so long as we can move to that more comprehensive understanding and new forms of movement, and we have some examples here, we can actually see impact at a very different type of level. The second thing is, if we're really serious about taking complex issues, we know that no central individual organization will hold all the solutions to this, whether it's us, whether it's cities, whether it's everybody else. It's a matter of collective distributed intelligence, that each one of us has a piece of it. The mechanisms we have at the moment to orchestrate this distributed intelligence are not necessarily working particularly well. And institutions and organizations still have a first instinct when they go to a community to ask what is the problem around here. instead of asking, what are the assets around here? What do you know about this issue? Where is the energy about this? And by the way, the energy in a local place might be quite different from our own agenda. So there might be, we might be very interested in pollution, but actually citizens in a particular location might be particularly interested about unemployment. How do we make the connection between these two things? What are the local solutions that we can tap onto and maximize? The final point is impact. We've seen it when we're trying to develop new interfaces to make things work that at the moment are not working particularly well. My favorite example is in Bologna in Italy. A bunch of citizens wanted to clean the graffiti around the city, and they go to the local municipality and say, we want to help. Now, guess what? The local municipality has no interface to work with citizens, right? They cannot procure them. They don't know what to do with other people. They want to help. There is no mechanism to happen. As a result, they instituted new protocols. Now we have 400 protocols of collaboration between citizens and the institutions. Now, why is this important? Because for many institutions, citizens are not legible. Literally, they cannot read what citizens are doing. They don't have instruments to understand what citizens are, what are their interests. It's just too much cognitive load for a city or for an institution to understand where citizens are. So we need new interfaces. Procurement is a classical one, right? Broken in terms of actually procuring solutions from citizens. Citizen engagement or forms to tap into citizen expertise, for example, polls, we've seen what are some of the limitations of these tools. Can we go beyond quantitative and start going into qualitative issues? All these type of traditional interfaces are called into question, and I think we see impact for organizations that are moving beyond this.
What about the fact that there's a perception that the only people you're really engaging, and this is, I'm not saying that this is you, there's a view that all you've got is the well-to-do, wealthy, middle-class folk that are literate in local governance procedures and processes and know what they're doing, and you don't actually get, the poor black people, the poor black, white people from the estates, the refugees or others that actually feel they have no stake and actually are often neglected and excluded from this process. Do you reach into paths that other people don't?
I'm so glad you asked this question, as if you had planted. I actually ran an experiment of this, but in a previous life, so I'll talk about it. Sorry, it's not current work, but it might be interesting. So I was working in Jakarta, and we ran two parallel experiments, right? Two different engagement processes. One predicated on a challenge, right? So the issue was climate adaptation. We issued a challenge. And what happened is that typically in that type of process, I'm not saying it happens all the time, but in our case, you would get the yuppies, the people who are very far away from the problem, who think it's a perfect time to experiment their new solution, whether it's blockchain, sensors, IoT, etc., in a poor community in a village, to actually try out what happens out there, right? I'm being facetious.
Absolutely, yeah.
We had actually really good people, so I'm pushing the point a bit too much. In parallel, we ran a process where we sent ethnographers into villages and remote islands to say, what are the local solutions that people have already developed? So these are not theory what might work, it's actually something that is already working. To give you an example, I'll make this story because I like it. We found this guy that is obsessed with insects, right? In his village, floods happen to be an issue of waste clogging the waterways. He figured out that one particular insect eats all the waste, and so he's got his own little farm to actually sell the bugs to the neighbors. Now, no engineer that you would have put into central Jakarta would have ever come up with bugs as a potential solution to the issue. So anyway, so we ran this process, and then we compare the two and put it into a blind panel of innovation experts and say which are the solutions that are most promising, innovative, etc., etc. Which one do you think won? The villages or the challenge? The villages, right? Now, this is obvious, but if you don't go into with that particular attitude that says solutions may already be existing, it's a matter of a particular problem, by chance, finding a citizen that happens to have a completely different type of expertise, in this case, insects, and then you find a completely different type of solution. That is not always happening, granted, and this is why we need other processes as well. But if you don't ask the question in the first place, then you don't find this type of solutions. And if you don't have processes, right, so if you work in the National Innovation Foundation in India, by contract, you need to go once every year in the most remote villages in India, and you're not allowed to ask a single question of what do you need here. All you need to do is look at existing solution at the local level. This is the type of new interface I was talking about, and this is where actually you can reach out to the people that you're referring to, but from a very different type of way, right?
But, yes, absolutely. But given both your examples, right? What about Europe?
An example?
So I'm thinking of, in terms of when you look at what's happening within the European Union itself, can you point to things that have happened in that way you just described?
Yeah, sure. A project I like a lot is called Dodgy Riders, which comes from the Council of Europe, and originally came under... Oops.
Don't worry, I'll come to that in a moment. Don't let that kind of put you off. Go on,
okay,
carry on.
All right. So originally started under the idea of how do you solve youth unemployment. And the original thing was to find a consultant, who would then put together a set of recommendations to put into a panel and say, this is what we do about youth unemployment. They suggested a different type of process, and they said, why don't we go out and look for young people that already solve the unemployment issue? What they did is they developed a particular methodology to do this, and found people, for example, someone who refused in his whole life to log into a computer. Now, you would have thought that this person is actually very poor and destitute. Actually, he has a very thriving barter business, because there are lots of people who are interested in security issues that want to learn from his approach. Again, how do you find this type of people? How do you involve it? When I asked them then to produce the policy, and lo and behold, it was a policy that was very different from what the experts of the Council of Europe would have originally thought.
Sure, sure.
And I thought that was a very interesting approach of that type. So there is a methodology, there is a possibility of exploring at least some of these issues. It's not a magic solution, right? So it remains many different issues.
No, it's ever thus. It's, the fact is that we know what the good practice is. We can point to it, we can see it. It's often where power gets trapped in terms of leaders and bureaucratic processes that hinder and stifle this kind of stuff. Thank you for that. Whilst you were speaking, obviously you referred to insects, and so here you go. Would you be ready to eat insects instead of meat to reduce your climate footprint? And 57% of you would be. It's moving back and forth, but yeah. Okay, I mean, there you go. Happy eating. But can I just ask?
Insects after this.
Yeah. Some of you in the audience now, just kind of gauge your view. Given what you've just heard about the approach, any kind of reactions, any kind of views on the whole issue about the model of engagement that we've just heard about? Any reactions to it? Any kind of violent disagreement or any experiences or sharing of learning that you've kind of gleaned? Don't be shy. All you have to do is put your hand up. Is this too early in the debate for you to be kind of a bit... there you go. Thank you, madam. All I ask you to do is say your name, please.
Hi, I'm Gitty Korshuizen. I've got a question about the Flogger project. Who were the Floggers? Were that the white male? Who were the Floggers? Which type of people went into the suburbs of Jakarta to flog the existing solutions?
Oh, ethnographers.
Yeah.
Photographers. Okay.
Ethnographers. Ethnographers.
Ethnographers.
Never heard of it.
Yes.
I'm sorry. I thought it was floggers.
No, that's okay. It's
Excuse
okay.
me.
We're in a multilingual situation. We have to kind of respect each other and be forgiving. It's not a problem. It's ethnographers that went out there. And, hey, your question still applies. Were the ethnographers diverse? Do they represent all sections of society? Were they recruited to be able to do what you wanted to do, but from a very different stratified class, economic background?
And I think the additional purpose to this is, organizations are trained that the only way to solve a problem is to define it, right? And so you go into a particular place and say, what is the problem here? Let's define the problem. As opposed to going to a place and say, is there an existing solution? And to me, that's the actual fundamental attitude difference. So yes, they are trained in a particular approaches. Yes, they have their own bias, like everybody does. But the fundamental thing is, if you accept, so there is a beautiful paper from the MIT, if anyone even wants to see it, which is called Solving Problems Without Defining Them. When you actually start looking historically at how many important innovations have come out, many of them were never actually conceived as a problem in the first place. Someone just stumbled upon solutions that then became, and the problem was defined later on, right? Or people came surreptitiously around certain type of solutions. If you at least accept that this is a possibility, then you go into communities with a very different type of approach. Because you're saying, okay, there might be solutions here, and they might not be fitting into your category of
Indeed,
work,
actually,
right?
that's about mindset and your kind of philosophy of approach about where the solution lies, and you see communities as assets rather than simply receptacles and a problem. But I think the issue is that how do you make sure you engage with that community by reflecting that community and those who are going to engage with them? That's the question I think people are asking, but we'll come back to that, obviously, and hopefully that will come through in the debate as well, because that seems to be a primary issue, I think. Let's move on to Aline. Aline, you're co-founder of CitizenLab. And given the context, especially in the past 10 years, where we've seen the emergence of a global network of mayors, for example, who have found it within themselves to really connect with each other and do quite inspirational things around climate, as well as other things. But mainly, you've got the C40 network, you've got the global network of governance in terms of mayors doing stuff around climate. I suppose people here would be interested about what is it that you're doing, and actually the same issue. Is it sustainable, and are people trusting more the process? Are there results from it, rather than it being a whizzy idea that sounds good and mayors feel good about themselves, but actually is it touching the people on the ground and doing something?
Okay, hi, can people? No? Yeah, okay, nice. Hi, my name is Aline, and I'm the co-founder of CitizenLab. We're an e-democracy platform or citizen engagement platform for local governments. So we now work with around 80 governments, mainly European ones. So we're now active in, I think, around 6 to 7 European countries. We're based here in Brussels, and we work with very small cities up to very big ones, and a topic often discussed on our platform, because we like many different policy topics are discussed on our platform, but one of the topics, and I think like in half of the cases, 1/3, is indeed climate change, becoming more sustainable as a city, often linked to the global covenant of mayors. And to answer your question, I'd like to answer with like one of our lessons learned. And in general, my first lesson learned would be that we need to empower citizens, but as you said in your introduction, that might not be always the right word, so I want to like nuance it a bit. I think we as citizens...
You don't have to agree with me, it's only my personal thought.
Yeah, but I'm just responding with some nuance here.
Sure.
So I think in general, you can still empower citizens when it comes to top-down topics. So if you're, I don't know what, building a highway or very like, projects, topics where the government really needs to take care of stuff, then it's very important to empower citizens, but you in the end are still the ones implementing as a government. But I think the process or the topic where we're talking about here, climate change and becoming more sustainable, that's typically something more bottom-up, where citizens need to come up with own ideas, change their own lifestyle, and in the end, it's not the government that needs to do stuff. Of course, in this covenant of mayors, there's like, they need to have an action plan in how they will be reducing CO2, but in the end, the citizens, they don't really need the government. They need to change their own lifestyle. And we see that what we are good at is that we kind of, as you said, try to define problems, but then along the way, citizens need to find one another and need to look for solutions together, be it investing in a windmill, be it car sharing, like many possible solutions. But I feel that our platform is sometimes, or like citizen engagement in general is maybe, or digital citizen engagement is maybe better for like these top-down topics, where, because like the bottom-up part, in the end, people need to come together, discuss, agree, take decisions, okay, who will invest in this windmill, etc. So I totally agree that if you want to have impact and want to engage citizens, you as a government can bring them together and you need to support them, but in the end it will be them that need to take the decision and change something.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and that's, I mean, I take your point, but at the end of the day, that's placing the onus on citizens to get their act together and, you know, do-it-yourself activity. There's a view, I suppose, for those of you who might be in the audience, about community development. There's a community development mantra that actually you need to invest time, energy in a community to help those things about coordination, that thing about creating space, being able to provide the opportunity to have the light bulb moment and to make a kind of a peer connection. That doesn't happen often by itself. Sometimes you get community actors that will do that. You know, a neighbor will say, let's 5 of us get together and do something. But that doesn't happen all the time. And often people say we need to return to a community development model that we've lost sight of. What's your view on that in terms of what you do?
I think linked to that, what is super important to trigger citizens and to engage them is that it becomes very like tangible for them and very close to their way of living. So what we always try to do is that we really personalize citizen engagement. So if you're living in a very big city, you don't want to like especially engage on the very high level, but you're more interested in engaging in like projects in your street or in your neighborhood. So on one hand, bringing it close to where you live, also like thematically, if you're into, of course, sustainable way of living, then you'll be more interested in that. But I think that's how you can really solve that, to make it kind of personalized. And to give a concrete example, we are working with the city of Vilvoorde. Maybe some of you know it. It's like actually quite close to here. And we work there on this global covenant of mayors, on their climate action plan. And we saw that it worked very well if we started from a neighborhood level. So they have like a good community development. They have like good neighborhood management as a city. So we started really from there. Also, the platform was built that way, neighborhood per neighborhood. And then if you're inside your neighborhood, then you raise like questions like, okay, how can we make this neighborhood greener, more sustainable? Then it becomes much more tangible instead of talking about the whole city where you don't care what's happening maybe 5 kilometers from here.
Sure. I mean, I know surveys of citizens across the world say the same thing. You're more connected and have an identity locally than you have regionally or nationally. People feel much more in touch with their identity about who they are in a locality, and people seem to forget that starting point. But if you had so give me the names of 3 cities that you think are really kind of up there in terms of this kind of activity.
I think up there is maybe a hard question, because like the intentions are always good, but you learn along the way.
No, forget about the intention stuff. You know, just like, let's have a list.
What works
do the dirt.
well?
Do the dirty.
Works well?
Who?
You want to know with whom it works well?
Yeah. From your experience, just kind of name them.
Let's see what works well. I think, the city of, sorry, we're working with 80 governments. Where does it work well? No,
okay, I know this is being live streamed. It's probably going to affect your funding in the future. Okay, I get it. But go on. This is about citizen engagement. This is about truth and honesty and speaking truth to power. So go for it.
Thinking. No, but I think it's super important because it's such a hard topic. You know, you can really, like, if you're, I don't know what, co-creating, if there should be, how the mobility plan should be structured, that's much more tangible than a climate change plan. So I think it's very hard to evaluate this.
Okay. Where do you sense that there's a greater type of the conditions and the motivation that's actually the right kind of conditions
what
for
I
change.
think that works is that if you, with these more bottom-up topics like a climate action plan, is that you as a government are more, let's say, supporting. So again, the city of Vilvoorde, what they are doing is every month or every quarter, I think they say like, okay, what are your ideas? How can we help you? And then they try to like link this kind of idea generation to their democratic structure. So every quarter, they get these ideas. They are discussed in council. We also do it in other cities. But I think that's a good way of working because that kind of links the bottom up with the city and how it's democratically governed.
To Vilvoorde.
Yeah.
Great,
yeah.
Good. We have a name from you at last. No, but the point, what you're pointing to actually is that people need to believe in this sufficiently that they structure it into their governance.
Exactly.
And actually, the issue here is about how do you share power, and it sounds as if that they're prepared to share power in a meaningful way, rather than just simply go to someone one year and say actually that's our strategy for the next 5 years. Thank you very much. And this is much more a consistent, regular approach.
I want to share like one last lesson learned into that, and that is the one of transparency, where we see that citizen engagement in the end is if you can see that if I'm like giving an idea today, how will this like eventually like make a policy or something? So you have like also on our platform, and we are now like we exist for 3 years, and these climate action plans take like much longer. But I think what's super important is that you can really see as a citizen how will this like what are the different phases in this policy cycle, and that also you as a government, and that's sometimes challenging, that you are open to share this process. And that you are open. Maybe sometimes it's not a direct democracy, citizens don't vote on it in the end, but you should be open on what your criteria are in evaluating them. So that's really something we try to push transparency in this citizen engagement process and what the different phases are.
Absolutely, and it improves literacy of transparency, because actually one of the issues is that it leads to better and more trust if you do it on a regular basis, and if you are genuinely going to open up that space to make it open, in fact, and say this is where money is spent, or this is the process, or these are the decisions we're taking. Okay, can I just go back to you in the audience? Any reactions? I'm still kind of pulling at you to kind of engage in this. Like, what examples, do you have any examples from your experiences of where it's kind of done really well? Or do you violently kind of think, actually, it's a different way of doing it? Lady there, thank you. Again, say who you are.
Hi, my name is Sofia. I'm from the Lisbon municipality. We have an issue with the public consultation. So when we do consultations, for instance, for the climate action plan, we have very, very little participation. And also when we ask very difficult or very general questions, such as, would you like your city to be decarbonized? Everybody says yes. But then you ask, okay, we are going to take this car lane and make a cycle path, or we are going to take this car lane and make, or take this parking spot and make a cycle path. And people say, I don't want that on my doorstep because that will reduce my quality of life. But you've just said that you wanted your city decarbonized. So how do we solve this personal, global interests between the different, in each citizen individually? At the same time, we've had a good experience with very, very local measures. So in the scope of a neighborhood, so inside a little place with 2 or 3 streets and 300 people, they can very, very easily decide and make very good decisions in terms of climate change adaptation, or in terms of their daily life, things that affect their daily life. But when we're talking about the city, we have that problem. We have the same problem with trees, for instance. Do you want more trees in the city? Yes, for sure. But can you take the one that's covering my window? Because that one really annoys me. And this happens every day. So it's a constant fight between what you know is right in the long term, but what affects the daily life of people just like you. So, comments on this? How could we solve
So the
this?
question of deferred gratification. Deferred gratification hits into behaviour change massively on this agenda. Do you want to comment on that at all? Or anybody else in the room? You're also experts in this room too, and whatever. So, do any of you want to respond to that? Do you share that?
A very small comment.
Go on then, please do.
Exactly, and that's why I'm going to tell you, because I'm Lithuanian, but I was living in Lisbon 7 years and loved it. But
that's because it's a cool city.
Now it's like a direct, like, citizen participation. So I lived first in Arroios, not really first, but well, and then I moved to Telheiras. It's a lovely area, in a certain way, but it's the last stop of a green line. And so I bought the car in the last year. I wouldn't mind not buying it, but as an inhabitant of the last point of the green line, for me to go, for example, to Alcântara would have been impossible. So, you know, in a sense, like, I wouldn't mind not using the car. I would be happy going by the green light to my university. That was IST in Almada, not Almada, Alameda. But like public transportation, this is the same thing I face now in Vilnius, and this is another question I would like to put is, like, I moved to a smaller city now, back to Vilnius, that is the capital of Lithuania, and I see people coming from bigger cities like London coming back and saying, like, you know, I spent 12 years in London and I never needed a car, but I came to a smaller city like Vilnius that is extremely green, and it's very small in comparison to big cities in Europe. But now I'm learning to drive a car because, you know, I need it. So because the connection is really,
because the infrastructure is really poor.
So I think that, like, car sharing would be extremely important in that case, and I don't know how much the people would be actually able to give up of a constant use of a car. Anyway, I was more into sharing the Lisbon experience, because I think if we go for, like, public transportation, especially with tourism nowadays, it would be great, because lovely city to live.
Indeed, indeed. Well, there you go. How many days a week would you be willing to give up your car?
I'm using 3 hours per week my car. I am really feeling like it's absolute nonsense to have it.
It's an even spread. That's interesting. Very interesting even spread. It's shifting. But you can see, you know, there is at least a willingness and a movement to actually think about it more and perhaps look at it differently. Okay, thank you both for your comments. And obviously, I think, you know, that'll come back hopefully in the conversation, because there is that thing about infrastructure when you move to smaller places, but there's also that thing about deferred gratification. We all know the urgency of climate change. We all know it. But you almost need two processes to come together. You need the community development stuff to happen that actually makes it real for people and say, actually, given that last year and this year, hottest time in the world, as we know it, you know, we know. And people live that climate change experience. You know, if you're in Brussels, you've had like winter in spring, and suddenly you have summer the following day, and you have winter again at night. And people seem to think, you know, but actually it is absolutely, it's visible, it impacts their lives. How do you make that connection to kind of, I suppose, tripwiring the deferred gratification thing? And that takes a time and energy. But also, you do need to make sure that local government gets its act together on waste management in terms of transportation, almost investing in a sharing economy rather than simply relying on people to do it themselves. So on that point, I'm going to move to you, myself, Katarzyna, who, you know, I think, what was it? You've become... You're a young leader, but you've become global woman leader from the Economic Women's Forum, etc. I've probably got all of that wrong, but you've been given a massive accolade as being a super duper person, doing some really interesting things. And you've written a book on the rise of megacities. I want to kind of look at it from a city perspective, given what you've done and what you've learned so far. What we do know is that cities are the main drivers in a number of ways. A, as polluters, contributors to the carbon use, as it were. They're the people, the cities are going to be, if we think about it, by 2050, majority of the world population is going to live in cities. And we know at the moment, a majority of the global population is in cities, and that's just going to go through the roof in the context of development in Latin America and India and Africa. It will just go through the roof. But at the moment in Europe, most of the population lives in cities, where we have the biggest problem in relation to, let's say, decarbonisation and the agenda about decarbonisation. What's your sense of the learning that you've taken, and what you think the implications are as we move to a model globally where cities will become much more important? They currently, many of them are the economic anchors of countries, and are going to drive a lot of the agenda nationally, both in terms of voting behaviours, but also consumption behaviours. Over to you. A tall order, I know.
Thank you so
but share your thoughts.
For having me here. And in that respect, I would like to, first of all, point out the dividing line between cities in developed countries and developing world. And what we've witnessed in the 20th century was the biggest increase in population in Asia, mainly in China and China and India. And what we are expecting in the 21st century, it is the biggest, even bigger increase in population in Africa. So basically, it will be urbanization in Africa, which will be on the top. And I think that many cities in developing countries, they are basically not logistically prepared to take this huge influx of people. So what it means that actually providing the public goods in that cities takes much more slowly. So what we are facing is increase of developmental problems, of urban poverty, of crime, of social exclusion, and of course environmental problems, congestion and pollution. So in terms of big cities, I think that they might have much more power when they actually make kind of a partnership together. So especially in terms of developing countries, I would say that what we need much more cross-continental, cross-city cooperation. We need European city to actually reach cities outside of Europe. And we also need citizens organization to reach citizens in developing countries. Because I think the question is whether the citizens in all these developing countries, they will care about environment. They rather need providing the basic needs. And then on the other hand, we also have the growing middle class. So the people would rather use the new cars rather than public transport, which is not fulfilling their expectations. And in that respect, I think we should target also the public-private partnership and the private sector to support the initiative for the climate change, for the environment. We need to also reach the academia for different kind of initiative. And I also believe that actually providing, of course, we need much more open spaces, parks, and use of renewable energy, but also we just need simple green solutions to eradicate poverty, like using the simple devices to cook or to heat, and affordable, but also to make people understand that actually this is changing something, that without that they can actually have a huge impact on their environment. So there is a question, of course, of funding, who will finance all of those projects. There is a question of sustainability of many of those projects, and of monitoring the effects, and then measuring the achievements. So I think it's really important that the citizens will actually be aware that what they were involved actually made a change.
Okay. In terms of what you've experienced, I mean, I take your point that, you know, when you think about, because people have always commented on how China is really the polluter globally, but China is kind of leapfrogging most continents, countries, in terms of its approach to climate change at the moment. It's just like phenomenal, the investment that's taking place, and both in terms of brain capacity, but also infrastructure. Europe clearly has done a lot of things on the agenda, clearly, and has made huge gains and actually created the argument, the business case, that actually you can actually tackle climate change and still improve GDPR. We know that that's the case in Europe, that argument has been made that it's actually not a money loser, it's a money driver, can be. But when we think about cities, megacities at the moment, do you have any sense of anywhere in Europe that you've come across that's almost created a kind of a citizen dashboard on the environment that actually gives people a sense of actually, this is what's happening in a city in terms of pollution rates, this is what's happening in terms of what we need to do in the next year for reducing X, Y, and Z. Is there a kind of easily accessible, engaging dashboard that tells citizens actually, this is where your city's at the moment in terms of pollution and pollution reduction? You have the answer to that question? Yeah. Okay. Great.
No, but it's just maybe you want to share. Sorry, but yeah, we don't offer it ourselves, but we do partner up with other companies providing these dashboards to cities, both in terms of like metrics on pollution, etc., but also the actions you are taking. How is it helping you in reducing CO2? So yeah. Just to confirm that there are... Excellent,
that's really good. I thought that was going to be a really good idea. So, go on.
Names? Yeah. They're nice, Belgian, France. They're called Futureproofed. Is like a company in Belgium doing this. Futureproofed cities. Yeah. So they'll be very thankful.
But do you know? No, absolutely no. Obviously, you know, sharing is caring, and also has commercial value sometimes. However, but in this context, fine, that data is created, the dashboard's created. But do you have an idea of how engaging it is?
Yeah.
So and how do they do it, you know, to make sure citizens do think, actually, right, this is what it means in terms of my car usage this month?
Yeah.
Because
so what they are doing, but then I'll give the word back to you. Is so yeah, on one hand they have the dashboard for the cities that gives an overview of like what is the current situation, and then they have like let's say they have 20 actions that they'll take as a city, be it car sharing, windmills, blah blah blah, and then you as a citizen can follow where the city is.
But through what means? On an app, on a phone?
Yeah, it's online. It's an online platform. It's integrated with their website, and then you can say like, okay, I want to support this and support this action and support it. So it's quite engaging. It's been quite a while since I've seen the platform, but that was exactly what you mentioned.
I mean, wouldn't it be great if you aggregated that across Europe? Imagine if just the megacities in Europe were to actually have a common dashboard that actually engaged citizens about what the implications are about their behaviours and choices. What's your sense of the aptitude for that? And I'll come back to you, Julio.
I think maybe the new technologies will be helpful in that respect when we can have these days this kind of virtual connectivity. So and even in developing countries and poor areas, people have access to smartphone apparently. So if there is kind of application when people can see the change they are making, maybe this will be helpful. Yeah.
Okay. Great.
And also for monitoring, it's very interesting. I just found out in India. Where they deal with a lot of problems with environment, and in Delhi they just introduced this application to check whether the street was cleaned or not. So basically they are not asking the supervisor. Supervisor will tell you, yeah, the street was cleaned, but they will take a picture before and after from the satellite and just send you on the application. So you see, no, it was not clean, so you have to change it. So I see the really great potential in new technologies for empowering citizens, because this is above that, this is the virtual connectivity we can take the advantage of.
It would be great to see in this pre-election year if the Greens agree to create some sort of mega dashboard for Europe on its climate credentials. That would be interesting, wouldn't it? Let's see if any Greens in the room react to that, as in political Greens, I mean. Giulio.
Okay, since we're asked to be polemic, so let me push slightly back of that, or rather qualify what you're saying, right? So I think if there is one interesting thing that we learned, particularly in the last few years, is that the assumption that if you only give people data, people can be citizens, politicians, or whatever, that doesn't necessarily lead to action. And that if that were the case, then nobody of us would be smoking anymore, right? Because the data is available, you know very well what are the conditions, right? So behavioral science has moved on in terms of trying to understand that many times it is not the rational side of you who decides why you have a certain type of behavior. And I think there is still not enough experimentation, right? So the dashboard is or the data, if you want, is a necessary condition, but not sufficient. So what are the other things that we need to start tapping into? Because we need the data, but we also need ways to move from, to accept that some people, or many of us, in fact, most of us, or all of us, if you buy into Kahneman's approach, is that we actually act oftentimes irrationally. So what are the interventions? Now, that is very difficult for a policymaker, for an organization, etc., to confront with, right? Because it's a completely different set of tools. You probably are very familiar with the famous exercise in California where they wanted people to reduce consumption of energy. And, they ran 4 campaigns in parallel. One was, or 3, I don't remember, but one was basically reduce energy and you save money. Impact on behavior, very little. Reduce energy and you save the planet. Impact on behavior, very little. Reduce energy, you'll be a great citizen. The 4th campaign was actually putting in the electricity bill one line that said, on average, your neighbor consumes 20% less than you. And that was most effective than everything else.
Absolutely.
Now, right? Now, that is, again, so this is not to say that this is the magic solution. It's very context-specific. It requires understanding different contexts, etc. But the point is that there is a new set of tools which is not purely on top of the data. So we need the data. I'm totally with you. But having managed a big data lab in Jakarta, I can tell you, just having the data doesn't change the behavior of us, of citizens, or etc. Right?
Yeah,
always. Right?
Your point is absolutely well made. But what data does, it gives, which goes to your point, it defines a problem. It tells you where people are at. And unfortunately, as we've learned from Cambridge Analytica, it helps you think about motivations, unfortunately. And then there you go. But I suppose the issue is behavioral science is key on this agenda, and what we know is that behavioral science says there's lots of gurus have been written stuff about the nudge theory, etc. But actually, this is kind of really human nature thing that actually we grow up knowing that peers matter to us. What our peer group does influences us so fundamentally. And there's that thing about nudge theory, which is that governments can do things like what you just described. Your neighbor is consuming 20% less, but actually in a community setting, that sense of what my peers are doing has a influential capacity which we underestimate. And how do you actually drive that in a positive way rather than negative, which a lot of the right wing, unfortunately, and the political spectrum have been able to be really smart about in terms of using nudge theory and behavioral science. I want to kind of thank you for that. I want to move to Citizen Xavier Daman. I'm going to call you that because of the things you've done. It's like Citizen Kane, but you've done. You're one of our European young leaders. It's part of we have a program called European Leaders where we recruit 40 under 40 young established leaders from a range of walks of life. And Xavier's done a number of things, including co-founding Spotify, etc., etc. Your attention's been
Storyfy.
Storyfy. Sorry, Storyfy. Got that wrong. Rub that. Can you kind of take that away for a second?
I wish
I'll be sued.
Spotify.
But you've kind of made it your mission and goal to really, is what I was saying earlier about inverting the dynamic around engagement and kind of losing the term empowerment, but thinking very differently about engagement. Can you say a little bit about your views on this agenda, and from your experience, what is it that you do or what others are doing that's actually kind of changing a different discourse or tripwiring the current debate that we have around engagement? What are the modalities that actually you think, from your perspective, are working, and what needs to change in terms of structures around us if we're going to get citizens driving change in the way that we want for the social good?
We can talk about this for hours.
Of course.
I think that we are living through an amazing renaissance and a change in our society. You know, like I'd like to talk about like how 20th century citizens were passive, not because they didn't want to be active, but because basically there wasn't much they could do. Right? No matter what you wanted to do in the 20th century, it required so much capital, so much planning, that if you wanted to share an idea, well, there was only mainstream media, and so you had to make a lot of investment in a printing press or radio, TV station, and so on. And so the result of that was basically as citizens, previous generations, where the only thing they could do was voting every 5 years, and in between complaining. That's, you know, and consuming information and consuming goods. And now, in the 21st century, we have like amazing technology, sorry if I may, in our pockets, right? We have access to the world knowledge, and more importantly, we have superpowers. We can share ideas across the world, things that our parents couldn't even dream of. And that is, and I think like we are only at the beginning of realizing of how much power that is, how much citizens can actually do. We were just talking about how big data, and you know, there's only so much that it's important, but what's more convincing is actually seeing your peers and comparing to your peers. I think that's the reason why we, as citizens, it's important that on all of those issues we take actions, because it's going to be much more effective for people to see other citizens doing something and having an impact than seeing a top-down government approach. You know, that people are like the cigarette, right? We were talking about that. I think it's really important. And so one example I want to give, to be really concrete, I'm vegan, and there is a group of people here in Brussels, 2 women actually, and like me, they are vegan. And instead of complaining about the lack of vegan options in this city, like we would used to do, they actually decided to do something about it. And they created a Facebook group. They have now 3,000 people who like their page, Veganizer, BXL. And now they have, like, also I'm building a platform, Open Collective, which aims at providing all of those citizen initiatives an easy way to collect money without having to create a legal entity and worrying about the accounting, and doing that in full transparency. And so they did that, and through that they have now like 7 organizations and 50 citizens who financially support them. And the result is that next week, next Saturday, May 26th, they're organizing a vegan street fair in Brussels. You are all invited. And I think it's amazing, because it shows how...
Where is it happening, by the way?
It's in Brussels, Place Sainte-Catherine.
Yeah, Place Sainte-Catherine, okay.
In Saturday afternoon. And so I think this is amazing, right? Because what used to basically before, when you wanted something to change in your world, in your city, basically you were too busy and you had to ask other people to fix the issue. Here, using tools, you know, social networks and other tools, 21st century citizens can do a lot. And now they organize a vegan street fair. This is amazing. And that's weird, concrete change happening. And most importantly, it shows other citizens, look, if they can do it, if we can do it, you can do it too. Maybe you're passionate about another topic, about helping refugees, about helping homeless people, about Montessori schools. No matter what you are passionate about, today you have access to the tools that gives you the power that you need to make it happen.
So I'm going to ask you, there's 2 things. I'm going to take issue with what you said about the last century in a moment. But the issue that, and I recognize there's a generational gap between us, obviously. You're a millennial just. But the thing about what you just said about your friends, it goes back to my opening issue about, are they people who are the well-heeled, come from good backgrounds, feel they can do stuff, have the confidence to make change? Or are you seeing situations and examples where people who are coming from the poorer circumstances with a lack of hope are doing it for themselves in the same way? If not, what can you do to help that situation?
Yeah, I mean, it's true that, people obviously, it's the pyramid of needs, right? If people, worried about where they're going to get their food, for sure, they won't have time to think about how they can, make a change. But, I want to talk maybe about two other citizen initiatives here in Brussels. There is Who Needs, for example. They try to help homeless people. To give them a place to stay. There is another one about teaching kids how to code. There is another one, just started actually last weekend at Be Central about teaching refugees how to code. Hack Your Future, thank you. So there is a bunch of initiatives like that, started by citizens whose goal is actually to level the playing field.
Yeah.
I think our democracies, the role of our democracies used to be, how can we make sure that everybody has a voice? Moving forward, our democracies' priority should be, how do we make sure that everybody has equal opportunity to start an initiative, to do something, to be an active citizen? Because if they become active, they will feel much more engaged, right? Because it comes from them.
Indeed. Indeed. And the only point about the last century, because I feel it's important not to forget the heroes and heroines of the last century. If you think about the suffragette movement, you think about Gandhi, you think about Martin Luther King, you think about the changes that happened, those were about citizens that actually turned the tide on some values that we take and some principles that we take for granted now, because actually had they not stood up, we wouldn't have the kinds of equality and approaches that were generated and determined in the last century that we have now.
Absolutely. I mean, what they did was amazing, but who are those people in the 21st century?
Indeed.
There was a totally different context. Right now we are operating in a new context, and so old recipes with new technology doesn't really mix together very well. Right? We have a new situation here. Citizens didn't have the same power 50 years ago. Okay, now what do we do now that we have those powers? How are we going to use those?
Can I open that question up to you guys? What's your reaction to that particular issue, or your experiences about the role of digital or And I'm going to put up a question about, if I can, my colleagues, about the water one, the 50 litres of water. If you could use that question, please. That's just to my colleagues. You're going to see it on screen, but please go ahead.
Hi, my name is Mira. I represent community initiatives across Europe. We're a small outfit called Ecolis, and we're a network of networks. Networks like eco-villages, transition towns, permaculture. So these are citizens on the ground doing things within their communities to change their lives, but also showcasing how to do it for others. And a lot of what they do contributes to climate action. So just wanted to say that. But just in terms of what you're saying, I agree. Technology has changed a lot, has changed the game for a lot of people and citizens to get active around certain initiatives. But things haven't changed that much, though. Like, the context is not different. Because for someone like me from an immigrant background, a Muslim, brown person of color, things are not that easy. It's not, like you said, somebody who comes from a healed, well-to-do background has the ability to do that. Even if I have access to social media, I don't have the community sometimes, I don't have the resources, and also not the mental capacity to engage on the things that matter to most. And I'm engaging in other types of issues, like fighting Islamophobia, fighting racism. And it's harder to do initiatives around that. People have tried, and people use technology to do that. But it's not always easy because it's changing values, which is different, and sometimes old methods are what's needed to change values. But thank you all for your valuable contributions.
Any reactions to what you've just said from the, or alternative or views on what you've heard so far? Lady next door.
Hello, my name is Kadri. I'm from Estonia, and I actually want to comment on our back.
No, the mic.
Okay, just ask because you can hear. I agree that I think
You need to speak up so the people behind you can hear.
we need both offline and online solutions, because what happens, your example with the vegans on Facebook, is that you end up with a closed group of vegans talking to each other, and then you have another closed group of meat eaters talking to each other. And this is also dangerous because it's called inbreeding of ideas, because you end up radicalizing each other. So I think it's really important to not get closed either offline or online. So I think both offline and online options are needed in combination.
Can't agree more. Yeah, absolutely. And that's why it's it's actually a problem that we are trying to solve, is that like, so far the internet has been really good at helping our generation to come together and do things together. But then once we want to get real, to get in the meat space, right, so to speak, right, in reality, we need to deal not with bits but with atoms, and it costs money. If you want to organize a vegan street fair and get outside of the internet, of your Facebook group and on the street, then it costs money. And so how do we solve that problem? And so that's why we are basically working with Open Collective on solving that. And to me that leads to what's the role of the city in all of this new environment. To me, it's really about, like, yes, leveling down the playing field so that everybody has access. You are talking also. Thank you, the previous person, for your comment. Right now, like, the only way you can do an association in a city is mostly, especially in Belgium and in Europe, is through subsidies, right? And so subsidies are being given away by politicians, right, to become a bottleneck, right, who come with their own bias. And so if you're a person of color, an immigrant, a refugee, like, good luck trying to get, finance for that. And so I think, like, the more also we're going to develop crowdfunding and all of those type of alternative ways to finance what we want to see in the world will help also level the playing field.
What would you say to, let's say, mayors from 10 of the largest cities in Europe at the moment? Say if you had them in the room here today, what would you say to them about what they need to change?
I would say, like, allocate part of your budget as a matching fund, which is, instead of having people in a top-down fashion who cannot become the bottleneck and decide what deserves funding, just say, like, no, we're going to automatically double the funding that all of those citizen initiatives are already raising. So I'm doing an initiative. I'm a refugee. It doesn't matter. Like, as long as I can show that there are people who care about what I'm doing, and I can find partners and people who are going to put some money down, automatically I know that the city will double or triple the investment. And so that's a way to remove the bottleneck and making sure that we decentralize the decision-making process about what deserves to be funded.
What reactions to that? Do you agree? Is it something that you think if your mayor did that, you'd be happy in accordance with? As citizens, voters? Reactions, please. Somebody. You must have a view on this. Really?
I mean, right now, like in Belgium, like it always amazed me. Like, basically, like, most of those associations, like, they waste 50% of their time, if not more, writing proposals, projects, like, to get a grant, and they need to convince people who have no idea what they are talking about. And so that's a waste of time. It's inefficient, and there is massive bias. Like, like talking about inclusivity and making sure that other people, everybody has access. I think it's something that we need to work on.
Well, clearly, even though you're not putting your hands up, I can see a lot of nodding heads that a lot of you agree with what you've just heard there. And clearly, we canvassed your view about water, and it's evident that personal hygiene is obviously more important than domestic space. Wouldn't we give up cleaning our homes, actually? So there's a choice there which says a lot about behaviour sets. But thank you for responding to that. Ellen, you wanted to come in, didn't you?
Yeah, I just wanted to share something quickly. Yeah, okay. Maybe first to respond on what you said, it's good that you put it like so blank, but I think there's definitely an evolution going on. Also, we see it, for instance, on our platforms where cities kind of open these grant procedures and where you need to gather support before, and they say like, okay, these are the criteria, but I still totally agree that they cannot decide not or to do it or not. But I think a few questions have been raised as well, like how do you combine offline and online, and how do you engage citizens that don't really have a voice or are not like active online. And what we have seen that really works there is that you have a citizen, you have the government, and then in between you still have like civil society who is like super important in these engagement projects as well. We've worked with, for instance, the Flemish government. There was like an offline meeting in the Flemish parliament. There was our online platform. But of course, we were missing out people from poverty, refugees, people who couldn't speak Dutch. So what we did there is that we we reached out to the civil societies who have the network. We gave them the tools to do it offline, to have like a discussion, the same discussion that is happening online and in a town hall meeting, but to have them in small groups, 15 people. And that kind of worked, because then people feel safe, and then their input is in the end also posted and shown, but not in their name, but more in the name of the organization. So I think that's still super important. You have the government, you have the citizen, the empowered citizen, but then you still have like the civil society who's representing these other groups.
And it would be, I mean, I know there's this, you know, I'm not sure how engaged you are about wanting to put your hand up and speak, but if you've got actual experiences where you've seen things work, where you've actually, in your place of living or through your professional experience, where you think actually this has worked and you're able to share why, or where you're seeing it not work at all, and what the consequences are. So have some, I was going to bring you in where you think actually, you know, it's working in my neighborhood or my city or my kind of country because of this, or actually I can see from experience it's just absolutely nowhere on the agenda. It'd be good to share your experiences and engage you in that conversation. But Julia, you wanted to come in?
Okay, on that note, since you're looking for examples, so at the moment there is a process called, I think it's called the Democracy Incubator, that is actually looking at all the examples that are happening across Europe of effective participation of citizens, but however struggle to scale, right? So many of the discussions that we are talking about are a design issue. How do you design the engagement process? And part of it is how do you actually connect these examples so that they become more than just a single point solution? Or can you? At least this is an open question, right? Can you actually, so that they tip a point towards trust as opposed to being just simple initiatives that impact in a particular place? So the Democracy Accelerator is an example that is trying to do this type of things. In terms of design, I think it's also interesting to talk about what would you ask mayors. At the moment, I think the term, we support many smart cities initiative, and I think the term smart cities, or at least where it's in many places it's conceived, actually reinforces the dynamic of power that you started with. So in many sense, what we want smart citizens, and smart cities is just as a product of that, as opposed to the other way around. We have a grand smart city program, therefore we're going to get smart citizens. But I think designing this type of projects and with this type of mentality, I think, again, requires a different type of design engagement process. I really like your approach when you say, it's action. Having done something quantifies more than having an opinion about it. Right? And so if someone has actually taken a particular type of action, a signal that they're willing to go beyond just having an idea, how can you give a premium, right, without compromising in any way an engagement process where everybody needs to have their voice to people who have done something? Is that a clever way? Can we design new processes this way? Can we rethink about smart science initiative and smart cities, citizen science initiative in a way that it is not, a municipality or an organization that determines what is the purpose of a science project and just use citizens to crowdsource information, and we get community to design their own projects, their own science projects, and there are some really interesting examples around Europe. You were asking about Dashboard, the smart citizens tool to actually develop in part of Barcelona, and all the things that Barcelona city is doing around giving data back to citizens, trying to flip the paradigm of the one ring to rule them all, and putting all the data into a centralized platform, and actually creating distributed platforms where people can have access to some of this data, and then we know whether it's sufficient or not. So there's design issues. How do you design these engagements? How do you think about people who have taken action as people that actually have voices to take into account? How do we do this? I think these are open questions. I don't think anybody has fixed it, but this is what when I started when I'm talking about collective intelligence. These are new mechanisms we need to create, and it's great to have experiments on your end that are starting to do it.
Mm. Yeah, absolutely.
I would like to add the point on actually a need of decentralization of power, because actually in many cases, in many cities, actually there are no mayors, or there is no power at that level. So we need clear division of task between the central level, central government, and the local government and the municipality. And one more point on diversity. It could, of course, create a lot of problems, but it could also be part of the solutions where we will create a sense of community in a city and actually different city stakeholders, people from different backgrounds will actually surround around common goals and common goods and environment.
I was saying, how many of you are part of a citizen initiative or an association in your city? Okay. That's the old way. I'm sorry, I'm not using the app.
No, it's good.
That's the
I'm going to use the old
way
in a minute. Don't worry. Yeah.
Great.
Okay. All right. Given what you've just, the questions you've heard, or thoughts you've had from what you've heard so far, anyone prepared to kind of put their hands up and say, actually, this is what's happening in my place, or what's wrong, or the whole idea about collective design? Any views, concerns, thoughts that you'd want to share? Okay. And others, don't be shy at the back, people.
I would like to hear more ideas about actually degrowth and actually about shrinking more, and maybe a perspective of shrinking. What I felt in this conference in general, there is a lot of interest in growth-based future. And I personally feel a little bit uncomfortable and looking with a lot of scary eyes. I don't know what you guys thought about, for example, about the presentation of Vincent Callebaut on the first presentation. Me as an architect, I am really concerned about it. I don't idealize that future, but I don't know, and that's my interest to understand how many of those people are out there in general, what your thoughts about this are.
Absolutely, I don't know. That's where, again, I think as citizens we have incredible power. There is movements now popping up about minimalism, about zero waste, for example, but also co-living spaces, right? Getting rid of your car. And so obviously all of those things have not been started by the people in power, right? They've been started by citizens who do it in some city, and then they share about it on social networks, and other citizens in another city say, that's a great idea. We also need a zero waste movement in Brussels, and so they start a meetup, and that's how we, as citizens, we scale and we make change at the global level, is by acting locally, experimenting with all of those new ideas, and then tell the world about it, right? Act locally and think globally, and the result, it's incredible. It's a revolution happening.
You make a good point about buildings, and we're going to have a debate later today around that. But it's striking that the poorest people in our communities in any city are living in the most unsustainable buildings. Unsustainable buildings in terms of energy use and everything. And when climate crisis kicks, it's those buildings that actually fall the fastest and create the kind of damage. But there's a need for. One of our experts said that the buildings that we need in the next 50 years are not even been built yet, given the pace of climate change that's taking place. But actually, it's a key issue in terms of planning and governance and what mayors are thinking about, because actually most of their cities are not going to be sustainable in terms of future buildings. Is there any kind of thought being given to that from your perspective in CitizenLab? From mayors? About buildings, sustainable buildings.
Yeah, I think it would have been very interesting to have a politician on the panel because you kind of see that I think what we're talking about here is social housing, and I'm sustainable social housing, and I am from a city called Aalst. I don't know if anyone knows it here. It's quite close to, it's in between Ghent and Brussels. And unfortunately, the mayor there, I'm just sharing a personal story, he's not at all very open to citizen participation. He sees that citizen participation starts with security and solving fires and stuff. So for him, that is security. He's also from a right-wing party. And you see that he there's still a lot of political willingness to invest in social housing. So I don't have any like concrete answer or solution for this. I'm just raising the point that I just, for instance, yesterday read an article that, for instance, in the city where I'm coming from, there's a lot of good things happening, but on the other hand, there is a lot of investment in like urban spaces, public spaces, but no investment in social housing. And that just raises a lot of questions to me, like how can you invest in public spaces but not in social housing? So that was just something to share. It's not that I have a concrete solution.
That's okay. Julia, you want to say that, then I'm going to kind of wrap up.
It's a very interesting question from many points of view. So Stephen Goldsmith was the former mayor of Minneapolis, and has this beautiful sentence that says, citizens live horizontally, governments live vertically, right? So you live in departments, and I bet that in most of the cities that you work with, there is no department of the growth, right? And so they cannot literally understand what you're talking about. You don't have an interface, because it's not their agenda. You talk about a completely different world, right? But for them, doesn't fit into a taxonomy. So this is, again, what I was saying, an issue of finding interfaces, right? One of my favorite examples is in Finland, they created this portal for citizen experimentation precisely because they acknowledge that they cannot upfront understand all the topics that citizens might be interested in, and the categories that government uses might not actually be the ones that are necessarily the ones that are interested to citizens. So there is an interesting interface issue again. On the more positive side, so the example you made about buildings obviously resonates to us because that's what a lot of things, we do quite a lot of work in that area. And now there's very different questions there. Again, so if you look at it from a point of view, going to a mayor who's interested in security or inequality or lack of jobs, etc., and you go in with, okay, we really need to change the buildings in the city, chances are you not get much interest, right? But if you're saying, look, you have a strategic risk, right? You have these buildings that in 20 years, or in the shorter term, because they look at political cycle, right? And so fundamentally, the system that you have here is generated to create big risk to the city further down the line, because people might find that their buildings are collapsing, and therefore you have all these type of social issues that come out of this. Maybe you get a different type of conversation. The question again is, how do you find something that is enough of a common agenda to have that dialogue in a meaningful way? And I think, again, so many of the examples that we have, yes, there is interest in from mayors as well. The question is, how do you do it? And often doing it requires changing hardcore back office stuff of governments, right? So regulations. So we have an example called Second Skin of a retrofit of buildings, building a second skin outside of a building. That has a completely new financial model and have a completely different financing model and a different regulatory model that would imply that people can sell back to the grid. Now, if you do that in some countries, this is not allowed. And so you see how this is a systemic issue that keeps the particular issue ingrained in a particular type of location. How do you provide mayors with this new type of tools to look at these systemic issues and say, what do we do about it? I think that's a really interesting challenge that we are facing at the moment.
So this is one of the central issues, is that if there was an economic approach applied to citizens, i.e. citizens were seen as a market for social good, wouldn't it change things quite dramatically in terms of not being canvassed only once every 4 years? And on that point, next year obviously sees the election of a new parliament here for Europe and a new college of commissioners. And we are engaging in a very earnest debate about what Europe should look like and what it should feel like and how it should behave. And one of the things that we want to engage in a debate with you and others under the hashtag of #EuropeMatters, where we want people to really engage with us and say, actually, if you were to be able to engage with politicians and decision makers, why would Europe matter to you, and how does Europe matter to you? So look out on our website for #EuropeMatters and engage in the debate, because we've set out a number of questions and issues that we would like people to engage with. But I want one final question to you before I do finally close up. And this is not on the app, don't worry. And this is not a party political question either. Given that the election is next year, given what you've known what's happened in this past 12 months, and in the context of this conversation about climate change and greener cities, I just want a show of hands from you about whether you think this agenda, the sustainability agenda or the climate change agenda, should be one of the top 3 campaigning devices for politicians across Europe. I'm not going to be naive and ask you that this is the top one, because you will also balance out things. Really. So you're on the whole, you're thinking it should be one of the top 3 campaigning issues. Be interesting. Those of you who don't think, do you feel brave enough? Those who didn't answer, put your hand up. Was that because you thought, crap question, not interested? Or are you prepared to say why? Anyone? Go on.
Thanks. I'm afraid that not many people understand that title of a campaign. And this is exactly the huge gap we have in our societies. I'm coming from Sofia, Bulgaria, which is now presiding the EU. And I don't think there are many people who understand the issue of climate change, because there are so many people, and especially in those countries that are the former Eastern Bloc countries, we have completely different issues. And climate change, you get it, you understand it when, for example, the dam overflows and your house is gone, but then you blame the government, not the climate change. So I think that the campaigning titles have to be again translated to a language that everybody understands, because otherwise we'll be talking to ourselves as we talk on Facebook, as we talk in the different campaigns. We are talking to like-minded people, and we don't get to the people that actually vote. Because the people who actually vote, when I go and talk to them about a green city, they say, yeah, we have a lot of parks in Sofia. They don't understand that I'm talking about the cleanness of the air, because they look up and they don't see anything. They're not worried about that.
Sure.
They have different...
Your point is absolutely well made. It's about how do you know, and I think your point is absolutely central to what happens in Europe next year in terms of the campaigns, because actually, as I said before, at the political spectrum on the right-hand side, people are smarter to tap into emotional geezers around, immigration or jobs, etc. It's about, I suppose, how does this agenda cut into what matters to people in terms of access to jobs, their health, their security, their neighbourhood. And it's about trying to find a way of communicating that in that way. Colleagues, I'm going to wrap up now. I hope that we've enabled you to connect the dots of the debate the right issues, and think about the kind of change that we need to have in place, or be thinking about at least in the future, especially in the next year, where actually our votes do matter in terms of what we will inherit as a commission and a parliamentary body. So remember that. Then let's thank our panel in the usual manner. Thank you very much for being patient with me and responding. Thank you for being patient with me. Also, next we have another session, just to let you know, so I'm advertising it, at 4:30. We have a discussion towards sustainable housing and low-emission infrastructure, which is happening in the Einstein Room at 4:30. Einstein Room at 4:30. Okay? So 4:30, Einstein Room. Thank you very much.